Welcome to Potter Revisited, episode 81. I'm Tori.
And I'm Shay.
Today we are covering chapter 21 of Goblet of Fire, the House Elf Liberation Front.
Or, as we like to call it, Barmy, old codger.
So we begin this chapter with the trio heading up to send a note to Sirius and also filling Ron in on all, the tea he missed while him and Harry were fighting. So they talk about how Sirius thinks that Karkaroff is he says he's bad news. And Ron's connecting the dots. He's like, oh, that makes sense that he's a Death Eater because that's how Lucius Malfoy and him know each other.
Yeah, some smart thinking going on. It's interesting because actually there's a character in Tolkien's writing also called Karkaroff, which isn't the same as Karkaroff, but it's very similar and it's a big old evil werewolf. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a fun name similarity. Also, Karkaroff for sure just gives off the most evil, sinister vibes. Absolutely villain energy.
Yeah.
When Ron's like, you know what? That doesn't surprise me. Sometimes they sort of portray it like he's pretending in hindsight. Oh, now that we have this information, I totally knew that. But
he seems evil.
The vibes are pretty strong. I feel like Ron totally could have actually picked up on those vibes and been like, yeah, he's creepy.
Ron's definitely doing this thing where he's just very over-enthusiastic to anything Harry says. He's just obviously trying to make up for being a bad friend for himself. He's just, anytime Harry says something, he's like, you know what, Harry, you can win this tournament. Harry, you're doing so great.
Absolutely 2 + 2 is 7, Harry. You're the best at math. And your hair is so beautiful and your eyes sparkle.
He also does this kind of in Deathly Hallows after he comes back from leaving, where he tries to make it up to Harry, but also more to Hermione, where he's just over-enthusiastic and agreeing with everything she's saying. So it's just Ron's way of trying to, make up for his bad behavior in his mind.
Yeah, he's paying his penance.
But it's funny because he's being super optimistic and he's like, Harry, you can win this tournament. I bet the other tasks aren't going to be hard. And meanwhile, Hermione's being, her usual pragmatic self. And she's like, actually, the first task was terrible. And if that's the first task, I don't want to think about the next 2 tasks. They're going to be really hard.
They're going to get worse, Ronald. They're going to get worse.
Yeah.
That is how you build excitement. You have things get worse.
I also love that Harry sends this really thick letter to Sirius because he couldn't resist giving him a play-by-play of his match against the dragon.
It's honestly so nice to see him just being a kid with a cool relative he wants to inform, He's just like, this cool thing happened, and then I did this, and then he said this, and then I did this, and it was so cool. He's just there's not a lot of moments where Harry gets to just sort of do something that's very of his age and sort of lighthearted and childish in a way.
Yeah.
But appropriately childish for his age. And that writing a long play-by-play of a cool thing he did to his favorite relative is it's spot on.
It's fun in the aftermath because we know how nervous and anxious Harry was before of this life or death thing. And now that he's done it, he's just like, oh yeah, it was so cool. Dragons are cool,
Imagine being serious in that situation. You're like, okay, Harry doesn't know anything. I'm on the fire phone with him. And I'm like, don't worry, I know the solution. And then you get hung up on, or you hang up and you're like, okay, Harry might die. That sucks. And you're waiting to hear the news. And you're like, gee, I hope he's not dead. And then you hear from him and you're waiting probably oh gosh, I hope he's alive. And the first thing you hear is, oh, it was nothing. I did so great. It was so fun. Totally would do that again.
Read this 5-page report of every single move I did.
And it was so cool. And everyone said I was so cool.
But they gotta leave that early because
yeah, Ron's like, Harry, we gotta go. We're gonna be late for a surprise party.
Ron!
I just love that. And he's like, oh, Harry, gotta get back on time for your surprise party. It's just so funny. It's just, and it's such a small bit. They don't even have Hermione go, Ronald, or anything. They're just yep, gotta get Harry back. Flatly telling him.
I feel at Hogwarts, there's no really such thing as a surprise because you just can't keep things wrapped up in that castle. Everyone knows everything.
It's just Ron telling him so casually is so fun. Not just oh, we should get back. People are expecting us. No, we're going to be late for a surprise party.
It did make me wonder, because we do have a lot of, the Gryffindors are always throwing parties for things, and they always seem pretty fun. And I'm just wondering how the other houses would throw parties. Because Gryffindors are obviously a bit chaotic.
Yeah, I'm sure they all throw parties, but maybe they're of a different, type.
Yeah.
I feel like Slytherins probably do, board game parties and, D&D nights.
I feel like it's very classy, where they're just very much, it's a catered, pre-planned event. And it's very... Because I feel like all Slytherins are kind of, at least in Harry's kind of, view with them, they're all very from, upper rich classes. And they're, old like old money kind of. So I feel like they're sophisticated.
Yeah, maybe Slytherins dress up a bit more and aren't wearing their pajamas and their favorite sweatpants. But I do think they would have some casual things too. But I think because Slytherin is that like planning, plotting, sort of long, like I think there would be a lot of game nights where you do like cunning, like the game Werewolf.
I can see them doing games, but more, I think more games that were like competitive.
Yeah, things like games like Risk or like not necessarily chess because it's kind of boring, but like things like that. I think and like even D&D is a nerdy thing, so people might think Ravenclaw, but I think Slytherins would love the heck out of D&D because of like the complexities and the intricacies and like just like I think that's the type of thing they would love and probably do as a house. I think Ravenclaws would do paint night.
Yeah.
I could totally see Ravenclaws doing a paint night. I have no idea what Hufflepuffs do. I couldn't imagine. I'm so much not a Hufflepuff.
I think it's all just the vibes. I don't think Hufflepuff really plans things. It's just kind of like, oh, we're just like doing something. It's in the moment.
Yeah.
They're all about like loyalty and everything. So I think, just like supporting everyone. So something good happens to someone, like, oh, we're just going to celebrate this. And it's just kind of like everyone join in.
Yeah, they do a weekly birthday party for everyone who had a birthday that week or something. Like,
yeah, I can definitely see like they celebrate everything. But it's always so interesting because like I think the Gryffindor parties that we are kind of like we see in the book seem very reminiscent of like what you would think like high school parties or just German parties are, where it's kind of chaotic but still kind of fun, where everyone's together having a good time.
It's the vibes where they would have red Solo cups and play beer pong if they were older. Like that's the vibe of the Gryffindor party.
If this wasn't a children's series, this would definitely be a drinking party.
Yeah.
So come in, and Harry's surprise party that he knows about is in full swing. Everyone's there. Everyone's having a good time. Dean drew some posters.
They tell us that Dean draws, and I think it's so fun because we don't get a lot of like hobbies or interests of the side characters, and I think it's really nice to hear that. And it's also nice to know that like the Gryffindors can have hobbies to fill their time besides fighting the Dark Lord every year, Like it's nice that they have other hobbies.
Yeah, I like that. It's like a little tidbit that they mentioned in like the first book that Dean's really good at drawing or whatever. So he does like a few like I think Quidditch posters for Harry, and this one talks about they have him having a poster of like Harry battling the dragon, and he also drew Cedric with his hair on fire.
That's just funny.
That's not necessary, Dean.
No, but he's an artist. Let him be creative, Tori.
You get it. It's the Gryffindor kind of like competitive edge. Like they're like Harry's our guy. Screw Cedric, even though Cedric has done nothing to them. Later on, I think it's Lee that convinces Harry to open the golden egg, which is the clue for the second task. And he opens it, and there's a terrible scream. It's completely empty. All there is a terrible scream. And I'd like what they kind of discuss what the clue could be, because Seamus's first thought is that it's a banshee, which I think is a fun tidbit, because I'm pretty sure in Prisoner of Azkaban, his Boggart was a banshee. So that's like Seamus's greatest fear. He's like, oh, Harry, oh, mate, you're going to have to face Banshee.
Good luck.
And then Neville brings up the idea that it's someone being tortured, and you had to face the cruciatus curse, which, Neville's trauma.
Poor Neville. Honestly, all of this unacknowledged trauma that like no one's letting him talk about or like providing meaningful like support.
Yeah, it's kind of a throwaway comment because next George is like, don't be silly, Neville, it's not going to be that's illegal. It sounds like Percy singing in the shower. You're going to have to defeat him
in the shower. Honestly, poor Percy.
Yeah, he's just being roasted in this chapter and he's not even here.
It's eternally being roasted.
But going back to Neville and the cruciatus curse, there's definitely a lot of like clues being dropped so far in this book about Neville and the cruciatus curse, his connection with it. And I think it's interesting that George says it's illegal, so it would never happen. But Harry actually does end up having the curse used on him by Voldemort at the end of this book. So a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Yeah. It's interesting that both of the things, I mean, excluding George, both of the people who answer seriously basically say their own worst fear is what they hear in it. It's very like that ink blot psychological test where it's like, what do you see in this ink blot? And it's either like a happy butterfly or an angry parent who's disappointed in you, Like it's interesting that the thing they interpret it as is their own personal.
And George's worst fear is Percy in the shower?
Except for George, who's joking. But the other two who answer seriously,
yeah,
it's their worst fear. And I think that's really interesting. Like, I wonder if Harry had heard the egg and it wasn't his egg, so he wasn't so distracted, if he would have thought, oh, maybe that's a Dementor.
As they're, hanging out at this party. Fred and George are, being Fred and George, and they're trying to offer Hermione food, and she's just like, no way. They obviously prank the food, so they have the canary creams that Neville eats.
And honestly, that is such good magic. Like, that's really advanced, like, transfiguration, and it's set to time after he molts, and like that's really impressive magic. And we forget because they do it on the most ridiculous things, but like that's really cool.
Yeah.
And they're very talented.
Yeah, there's a lot of advanced magic that goes into what they do, but it's because what we assume is they use it for like lowbrow like things, that it's not as impressive as say like stuff Hermione does later in the series.
Yeah, but they're very good at magic. They really, really are. They're incredibly talented.
I just don't know how anyone could trust Fred and George with food or anything. Like Hermione obviously knows them, but I'm like, Neville, come on.
Yeah, poor Neville.
But I actually kind of hate the idea of the canary cream because I feel like pranks that like unconsensually do something to you. Don't like that. And also, I just feel like at a party, I don't want to be pranked. I can never be in Gryffindor.
We have too much social anxiety to exist in a world where anything you eat could turn you into a bird.
Yeah, I don't want something that's going to bring attention onto me. Like, poor Neville, it's always him.
Yeah, but he thinks it's, like, I think it's different, like, it's hard to know because, again, I can't relate to most Gryffindor things, but I think if it turns you into something that's unquestionably very cool, so it's not like embarrassing, like, oh, you got turned into a stinky rat or a pile of, or like a goofy fly, like, but like a cool bird that flies around or whatever, like, I think it's like, if it's not going to psychologically traumatize you and it's not an embarrassing thing to be, it's less cruel. Kind of like it's like a cool thing that happened to Neville. It was funny, and Neville comes out not looking any worse for wear or like an idiot, you know?
Yeah, and Neville kind of goes along with it. Like, obviously, they're not doing it to be mean to him or like single him out. Neville is obviously a good sport, and he goes along with it. And Fred and George kind of uses to segue into that they're going to sell this product of canary creams, little pranks for your friends.
Yeah,
I did find it interesting that when they're trying to convince Hermione to have a canary cream, she's trying to slyly manipulate Fred and George into telling her about the kitchens, and they kind of catch on. But she's being all innocent, being like, "Oh, where are the kitchens? What's there? How did I get in there?
Draw me a map, would you?"
And they're like, wait a minute. But we'll talk more about the house elves and the kitchens later on. The next day, they're kind of, Harry's kind of leading us into winter as the seasons change. And there's this throwaway line about the horses that pull like the Beauxbaton's carriage and how they only drink whiskey. And apparently the whiskey fumes are so intense that the students are feeling like lightheaded. Hagrid, are you getting the students drunk off whiskey fumes?
I think single malt is the fancy whiskey. Like, I'm not a specialist. You know, I don't have a qualified taste. But I think single malt is pretty, like, is he good at it? Is he making, because, like, you want nice aged whiskey. If you want, like, a nice whiskey, and the way Madame Maxine worded that they drink only the finest single malt whiskey, it's like, how is Hagrid making fine whiskey? He's not a renowned, well-known whiskey. Like, to me, he should be bringing in nice whiskey from like Ireland or something. And it's weird that he's making it because that is not the finest. That's like hooch.
So definitely a throwaway line. Because I don't even think I realized reading this as a kid that like whiskey, like they're drinking alcohol. I don't think I ever like clued in because it didn't make sense.
Like horses shouldn't drink that. I mean, and no one should. It's bad for you. So like you definitely shouldn't be giving that to your horses, and especially only giving them that. Like that is so unhealthy.
Apparently that's the only thing they drink, not water. Being hydrated, it's for losers.
I have so many questions about these giant horse livers.
We always talk about Hagrid and his alcohol issues, and yeah, just, giving the horses that hooch or whatever, and the students are getting drunk off of it. But anyways, not a great idea by the Scroot patch where Harry and friends are, because they've had the lesson from hell, where Hagrid's like, let's see if they want a nap, and we'll just nail them shut into these boxes. And honestly, you say what you want about Malfoy and co., but they had the right idea. They barricaded themselves in Hagrid's house, and honestly, smart.
So smart.
Harry and Hermione and Ron have stayed out to help Hagrid with the Scroots because, they're good friends. And of course, who should stumble across them but Rita Skeeter? And I have so many questions. But first of all, like, how can she just, like, Hagrid says that she was banned from the grounds by Dumbledore. But the thing is, like, how is she currently on the grounds?
How, like, to me, just having been a person who was at one point a child in, like, primary school, middle school, and high school, like, if an adult arrives on campus, they either stay in their car because they're picking their kid up, or they go into the front office and wait for their kid to come. Like, you can't just have adults who don't work at the school walking around the children. Like, that's not safe. That's dangerous.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Especially because Hogwarts is protected, so you can't like just like apparate onto the grounds. Like, how did she get onto the grounds, and how is no one aware she's on the ground?
Like, did she apparate into Hogsmeade and then walk or fly on a broom?
Do they not have some kind of sensor being like, oh, there's like an unauthorized person here? Like, I feel like they should have some kind of log being like, okay. Especially because of the tournament and there's a lot more extra people around being like,
We know secrets about Rita Skeeter that could be how she got on campus. But it's weird that Hagrid and other people aren't more concerned about how she got there.
Yeah, especially not even that she's there. It's just like she interrupted a class.
Yeah.
Like, again, it's Hagrid, and no one really takes him seriously as a teacher.
She doesn't know that yet.
He is teaching a class, and she just kind of interrupts the class, and he just is entertaining it. He's like, oh, yeah, you're a journalist? Yeah, sure, let's do it. Let's set this interview up. And I'm like, Hagrid, you're teaching.
And it's so annoying that, like, Harry wants to tell Hagrid, like, no, don't do it. But he doesn't want to say it in front of Rita. And I'm like, fuck that. She should know you don't like her by now. It's obvious she's, like, literally just say, Hagrid, she's not a real journalist. Trust me, don't bother. It's fine. Just tell him that. It doesn't matter if she hears you say it. It's the truth.
Harry's just too polite at this moment, but I mean, Harry and Ron basically flipped Rita Skeeter off at the end of last chapter, so you could feel like they could just be like, Hagrid, come on.
Like, they should tell him not to show up or to cancel, because, like, that's not going to end well for anyone. Just tell Hagrid not to do it. I don't understand why he did it. And, like, to be honest, like, she misquoted and made up quotes for Harry and caused him trouble. She doesn't even have to do that for Hagrid. He will say the things that get him in trouble. Like, she doesn't even have to make anything up with Hagrid. Like, it's such an obvious, huge risk. Like, just don't let him go. Don't let him go, Harry. It's dumb, and I hate it.
It's just such a red flag that she's just, like, there. Like, obviously we know, like, probably how she got into the grounds, but it's more the fact that, like, no one does anything. Like,
she should not... Being banned means if anyone sees her, she should be chased off the grounds.
What does being banned even mean, Dumbledore? If you're just gonna let people wander onto like the thing, especially when there's like foreign wizards there, like they don't know who she is.
Yeah,
you just have a strange British lady asking you questions.
Like, ma'am, who are you? Why are you here?
Don't trust this government.
She shouldn't be there. It's crazy that she is. It's absolutely crazy. And it's crazy that Harry lets Hagrid accept an interview from her. That's also crazy. Bad maneuvers on everyone's parts. Then they go to divination, which is always so fun.
Harry loves that divination now because he has Ron back, which is so fun. He's like, Ron makes it fun, so I love that for them.
They're having a good time hearing about how they're going to die horribly, as, you know.
Not taking it seriously, as usual.
And after class, actually, Ron specifically says, if Harry actually died every time Trelawney predicted it, he would have an extra concentrated ghost. And I think it's interesting because that sort of like, in a way, parallels, like, almost the reverse of Horcruxes, like a really concentrated ghost, meaning like you died a bunch of times and you came back, and when you finally died the last time, like your ghost is extra ghosts because it's a multi-death ghost, and it's almost the reverse to Voldemort, who breaks the little pieces off and separates them. That's like adding extra pieces together. I don't know. It's just like there's something about him saying it like that, like an extra concentrated ghost, that felt like the exact opposite of Voldemort, who has like less than a full soul.
Just at this point, I didn't write this down, but Ron, when they're leaving, they got no homework, and he's super excited because he's like, I hope Hermione has homework because I love not working when she is. And he's just so petty. I love it.
To be fair, Hermione probably likes doing her arithmancy homework, so it's a win for everyone.
But Hermione stumbles in to find them because she's found something crazy, and she's like, you gotta come, Harry, you gotta come. So basically, Hermione has led them to the kitchens, and they're all like, Hermione, you can't make us do spew stuff for you. We don't want to do that. But she's not even really about spew right now. She's put on hold because it turns out Dobby is working at Hogwarts, and he's super excited to see Harry, and Winky's also there, and she's very sad.
Yeah. So the first thing that strikes me is they talk about Dobby and his outfit. And he's wearing like a tea cozy and goofy socks and just like
kid shorts, a tie,
a whole bunch of items of clothing that make no sense together. And he's really happy about it. And it reminds me of when like a toddler or a small child first starts getting to dress themselves. And it's crazy and it makes no sense because they don't have the understanding of those societal norms to limit them. So they can put any piece of clothing on any part of their body, and it's fun and it's exciting and nothing has to match.
I think it's also the choice too, like the freedom being like, I am putting this on my body.
Exactly. Exactly. It's one of the first things you have control over in your own life. Up until a certain age, you don't have to choose what you're eating. You don't choose what order you're eating the food on your plate in half the time. It's no, eat your vegetables before you finish or whatever. And so, like, it's one of the first times in your life you get to start having some sense of like autonomy in your own choices and your own self, how you choose to be presented to others. And it's so powerful and validating. And you can really see it in Dobby. Like, he's learning he can express himself, and he's really loving finally having enough freedom and control over his life to do that. And the way he dresses really represents that. It's joy. It's joy and it's excitement, and it's empowering to him. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, so Dobby's kind of giving us like a backstory of where he got from End of Chamber Secrets, being freed by Harry, to where he is now working at Hogwarts.
Yeah, so basically Dumbledore was the only employer who was willing to pay a house elf, because most people are like, house elves are free. That's the point.
Lame.
So Dumbledore's paying Dobby, and Dobby asked for less money than Dumbledore offered because he's like, dude, that's crazy. Simply can't accept it.
That's too much. I mean, you gotta ease into it. I mean, it must be crazy going from having like everything being very controlled and that was just your life to actually having like choices and being like, wait, that's too much choice.
Yeah. And it seems like Dumbledore offered him a decent amount of money, the original offer. And I'm like, what would Dobby buy? Because Hogwarts like pays to feed and clothe the house elves, like provides them with what they need. So like, would he just be swagged out in like designer clothes? Would that be what happens? Like, is he rolling around in like Gucci tracksuits and like Louis Vuitton bags?
Yeah.
And Dobby's also talking about how he's allowed to shit talk his boss in a way that he wasn't allowed to shit talk his masters when he was the enslaved house elf. And he's like, yeah, Dumbledore even said I could call him a barmy old codger if I wanted to. And I love the British insults. I have no clue what that means, but I love it. And knowing Dumbledore, it's probably true.
I think it's kind of crazy old man or something like that.
Yeah.
Dobby still kind of struggles a bit with like his previous enslavement, where he does say that Lucius and family is like very dark wizards. But in contrast to Dobby, Winky is there, and she is very much not happy being freed. Dobby's like, very much have taken care of his clothes. They all look really nice. They look kind of crazy together, but they all look well taken care of. Meanwhile, Winky's clothes are all like stained and singed, and she's crying, and she's still calling Mr. Crouch her master. And we get a little bit of tidbits that when talking about Mr. Crouch, they mention that they've seen him and he's fine, and he's here with Mr. Bagman, and she lets it slip that Mr. Bagman's a very bad wizard, and her master does not like him. And I just find it's very interesting because it comes right after the end of last chapter where Bagman was offering to help Harry.
It's interesting because they definitely in this book put a lot of insinuations in place to make you very suspicious of Ludo Bagman.
Everyone, yeah. There's so many new characters in this book, so there's a lot of like
Karkaroff and Bagman are sort of especially, they give you information to be like, they're shady, you should be suspicious of them, they're shady. And this is one of those moments where they're like, don't forget, you just remembered that Karkaroff is evil, but also Bagman. But also, to be fair, Winky like blindly loves everything that Barty Crouch says. And so Barty Crouch could just be like, this guy's a bad employee, he's lazy, he tells jokes at inappropriate times, I don't like him. And that could be very bad wizard, in that he's not a good wizard who is organized and punctual, which would be what Crouch defines as a good wizard. So like, it could be interpreted either way, bad as in evil or bad as in not reaching the standards of Barty Crouch, and Winky blindly supporting and exaggerating, I
think Hermione brings up the thing about Bagman, because she's like, that's kind of weird. And Ron kind of says that, it's probably just because, Crouch doesn't like him because he's like a bad department head and not like Crouch or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's still interesting. It comes right off where Harry's kind of unsure about Bagman because Bagman offered to help him, and Harry's like, that's kind of like cheating. That's kind of weird. That's kind of sus. But we also got this nice moment between Dobby and Ron, where Ron offers Dobby his jumper that he gets for Christmas, which I think it's sweet that Ron's being, nice to Dobby. He's never actually met Dobby before and wants to make him happy. But also, like, Ron, your mom spends all of that time making you this sweater every year for Christmas, and you're just gonna give it away?
Honestly, I bet Miss Weasley would happily make one for Dobby.
Yes, that's what I'm like. What, they should have just asked her. She would have made one, and she probably would have made it the right size for him too.
Yeah, and it could have a D instead of an R, because like, what's Dobby walking around in an R sweater for?
Like, I do get that Ron gets a new sweater every year, so he's like, I don't really need it. But I'm also just like, your mom's, like, I'm a person that also, like, crochets and knits, and I'm just like, that's a lot of time. Like, I'm sure with magic, it's probably faster. But I'm like, that's a lot of, like, time and love you're putting into this object for someone.
It's nice for Dobby and it's sad for Mrs. Weasley, especially because I bet she'd make Dobby an incredible sweater. Like she could like put a pattern of socks on the sweater, you know, like instead of polka dots or whatever, little socks.
A picture of Harry on the sweater.
I heart Harry Potter. And she makes a matching one for Ginny.
Yeah, but as they're leaving, they are given a bunch of food, which they're putting in their pockets.
Oh my gosh. They're putting pies in their pockets. How does one fit a pie in their pocket?
I'm assuming it's kind of like a meat pie. Like in the UK, they have like handheld pies that are just like, I think they're like meat pies, like a mince pie. Yeah.
But it's still like a pie. Like if I put it in the fridge, I would put it in a Tupperware and not just like and your pocket is not like a flat surface. You know what I'm saying? Like it just sounds so messy, but I want some. Like I'm curious, I'm intrigued, and I'm inspired. I would like some pocket pies.
I could see it going in because I feel like they're pretty like solid, and I'm assuming it's like the pocket of like their robes or whatever, not like a pant pocket. That'd be kind of weird. They have this poor like line about Percy at the end where they're kind of talking about like why like Percy thinks Bagman's bad, or like, oh, it's just because of Percy or whatever. And then Ron says Percy wouldn't recognize a joke if it danced naked in front of him wearing Dobby's tea cozy.
Percy is perpetually the butt of the joke. And the joke in this case is that he doesn't get joked.
This made me think because the last kind of moments of Fred's life, which are terrible, is that he has actually like paused because Percy made a joke. And it's like kind of comes full circle where he's just being roasted here, it's not even here, by his siblings because he can't take a joke.
Yeah.
Or he can't recognize a joke, or he's no fun. And Percy's like last moments with his brothers as he's making a joke.
It's kind of like instead of saying Percy's so bad at jokes, he wouldn't recognize one, Ron could say, Percy liking jokes is so unlikely that if it were to happen in a battle, one of my brothers would surely die of shock, you know, or surely die of a lack of, you know, like, and it's true. It's a fact. Percy telling a joke is so shocking it causes death.
And that's why Percy doesn't tell jokes. But kind of a big part of like this chapter with the house elves is kind of seeing like the stark like view of the other house elves and how they view their enslavement, how they're kind of really wary of Dobby and how he speaks about being free. And we get the juxtaposition between Dobby, who's very happy being free, and Winky, who's very miserable being free.
Yeah, you definitely see. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like cults. When someone gets out of a cult and they've been fully unindoctrinated and they can see the reality of the situation despite basically the brainwashing, and there's people who still believe what they were told and still trust that what they were told is the way and are so comfortable with the norms they've been accepting that it takes a huge leap to like come to terms with something you thought was good not in fact being good. And like the other house elves haven't yet sort of realized that they've been told this is what they like for so long and told this is what they're for so long and this is the only way they can achieve joy for so long that they believe it and they don't realize that there's other ways for them to feel fulfilled, you know? But Dobby's there.
It's also like the difference too, because anything that's different, they're like, this is wrong. It's not the right way we do things. It's not the usual way. It's against status quo. So because it's different and unusual, they're kind of wary of him. They're like, we don't understand him or what he's doing because it's not what's usual. Any kind of time there's something that's people that are doing things differently, people question it.
Yeah, for sure. Fred and George specifically, when Hermione's asking about the kitchens, tell Hermione to leave the house elves alone and not put them off their cooking. And it's weird how the entire house elf subject is presented to the readers. It's like the good guys, the Gryffindors, the Weasleys are all okay with slavery, and it's presented in such a way that like the reader wants to laugh at that joke. I'm like, yeah, Hermione, ha ha ha. Like it's presented like Hermione is the problem for caring about this thing, and that the problem isn't the oppression of the elves and the complacency of the wizards in their oppression. And like that's kind of crazy that that is how it is presented to us. Because they could totally have this be something they write in a way that has the reader sympathize with Hermione and be like, yeah, why is it? But that's not how it's written. It's written to ridicule Hermione and judge her and laugh with everyone else.
Yeah, Hermione's written as overreacting. They're just like always punching Hermione down, being like, oh, she's obsessed with this. Oh, she's going crazy. Like, oh, Hermione, this isn't done this way. And as a kid, you're kind of leaning towards Harry and Ron because Hermione is a very intense character and she does come off as very preachy and kind of annoying. But that's in her character. But I think looking back at this, you're just kind of like, but Hermione was right. Like, obviously, she didn't do everything the right way, but she was fundamentally, like, right. Like, they should be enslaved. And you have these good characters like the Weasleys who are basically, like, justifying, like, oh, this is the way it's done.
Yeah, I think it's specifically weird for, like, the Weasleys, who our times are treated themselves as, like, less than other wizards due to their finances or Arthur's job not being prestigious or them being quote-unquote blood traders. And, like, so they know what it's like to be treated like you're not equal to others, and yet they themselves have no issue with the social standing of the house elves. And it's sort of really one of those examples of inherent selfishness, where like even the good guys don't want to end the oppressive system because they benefit from it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. You do see that a lot where people who say that like, you're generally a good person and you believe you're morally a good person. But the thing is, like, some things are so ingrained in your being and that you benefit from that you don't think about them. It just seems like, oh, things were always done that way, so why would you change it? And it needs someone like Hermione coming from an outside perspective, being like, hey, this is slavery and this is wrong.
This is actually not okay and not normal.
And it's hard for, I think, people who grew up this way being like, well, this is the way it's always been and it's completely normal. I don't understand why you think it's wrong.
It's always an uphill battle to get something changed that feels like a norm for people. And I just think, like, it's great that it's being addressed in a kid's book. The idea of slavery, the idea of treating other individuals or groups as less than you and subservient to you. But it is presented completely in the wrong context by making Hermione the joke and Hermione the villain and everyone else correct in the way it's presented.
Yeah, I feel it's like no one really takes her seriously. Like, obviously, Harry agrees with her, but he thinks that she's doing it the wrong way or she's too much. Like, everyone always says that, like, the idea that, like, oh, house elves, like, Harry agrees that Dobby should be free and he made him free, but Harry's not going to do other things about it. And it's kind of presented as Hermione's, like, you know, little project, and she does it herself, and no one really does anything about it. And, like, later on, Ron, when they get together, Ron kind of comes around and he's like, oh, we have to think about the house elves. And it's like, but, like, Hermione's kind of whole arc, we're not really shown, like, the aftermath of it, of, like, what happens. And it's kind of, she's just kind of used as the butt of the joke. It's just like a character thing that she's like, oh, she's like really proactive about this.
And it would have been such a great way to like bring the subject up to kids and show kids about like grassroots level activism and standing up for what you believe in. And like could have been a really great thing to have in a series like this that a lot of kids are really attached to. And the author just wrote it in such a way that just like, it feels really gross to read it and think that like they want us to laugh at what the hell themselves are going through, and they want us to think Fred and George's jokes are funny and think Hermione is ridiculous. And like it's crazy like I can't imagine like reading it now. I'm like I guess I laughed at it when I was younger, and I'm like mad at 12-year-old Shayna for laughing at Fred and George's jokes about it. But now I'm like, my goodness, like, and they could have. That's the thing. It was such an opportunity for kids to learn that from literature and then have that with them going forward for their lives.
I do feel like the spew, like, kind of subplot either has aged well, but also not aged well. It like, hasn't aged well in the way that, like, the way it's perceived by other characters, that Hermione's being silly or kind of, like, over the top. But I like the idea that they have this subplot for Hermione.
Yeah, Hermione's stance on it has aged well in that it's a character who says, I believe in this thing, and regardless of what everyone else, even the people she knows and loves, says, she stands by it and she goes for it, and that's great.
And she doesn't waver.
Yeah. But, like, the way it is tried to be, like, the emotions they want the reader to get out of that is not the emotions they should have been trying to get out of the readers for that situation. And the way all the characters acted, like, was not ideal. It was important thing to have, but gosh, does it feel grimy listening to the jokes.
Yeah, reading it back, now you're kind of like with Hermione being like, why is everyone against Hermione?
Anyhow, I also on the subject of the House Elf Liberation Front, I think if Hermione just called it the Elf Liberation Front, the acronym would be ELF, which is excellent. And as we don't hear about any other elves, And I'm sure if there were other elves, Hermione would also support their liberation. So we don't actually need to specify their house elves. So I feel like that's probably a good name choice she could consider. And Hermione really needs some like PR and marketing help, I think. And I think maybe she could consider reaching out to Dean for some like happy Dobby in his clothing posters, you know? Like I feel like she can find people who have the skills she needs to help this cause sort of keep going and get elevated and seen by more people.
Very much so. But that's the end of the chapter.
It was a heavy one. The way we discussed it was really heavy, listeners.
Yeah. I mean, this book's starting to get like into some, deep context.
The books are maturing, and so the characters are maturing, and so too is the type of content that they're engaging with.
We'll be discussing a lot more, deep stuff besides how many spells Harry has learned. Now it's like, politics, morality,
human rights.
But do you have any last minute thoughts before we wrap up?
I guess I just want to say that I support Dobby and his tea cozy.
Love that for him.
I love it.
Yep, I love that they bring back Dobby, and I kind of miss that they didn't have him in the fourth movie. I get there was a lot going on and they couldn't include it, but I think seeing him in Goblet of Fire would have been so fun.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't even have to have the discussion parts where they could have just had Dobby show up briefly and do a quick, not even a necessary plot thing, just I'm doing a thing that happens at Hogwarts and the house elves do, and he's wearing his cute little outfit and waving.
He just could have showed up and been like, Harry, I'm working at Hogwarts now. By the way, I found out how you could swim across the lake. Here's some gillyweed. Bye. But that's it for us. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next time to discuss Chapter 22 of Goblet of Fire, The Unexpected Task. And I'm very excited for this chapter.
Yep. We can talk about the important stuff like dresses and dancing.
We're getting into crushes, dating, dances, all that high school shit. I'm so excited. Some embarrassing cringe moments for Harry and Ron. Hermione being outed as a girl to them. Shocking. So much good stuff happening. But if you have any remarks about today's episode or previous episodes, you can leave a comment on Spotify or email us at potterrevisitedpodcast@gmail.com or reach out on social media at potterrevisited, and we'll be back next time.
Bye.